everyone. Happy Wednesday. I'm so excited to be here with all of you for this webinar, which is really special for me for two reasons. The first is the topic, positive psychology. I've been flirting with positive psychology for years now as a student, an avid reader, sometimes even blogger. But the second reason that today's webinar is special for me is because of our presenter, Lisa Bevill. Lisa is an executive leadership coach. She holds multiple coaching certificates. She holds an executive master's in positive leadership and an MBA from IE in Madrid, Spain. She has an undergraduate degree from Forté. She's from California originally, but she spent most of her professional career in Europe, particularly Germany and Madrid. Yes, she speaks multiple languages, but currently she's spending her time in Spain teaching, consulting, and coaching. And while I often say that our presenters are friends of Forté, I'm really happy to say that Lisa's also a personal friend of mine. So I'm really happy to have her presenting today. Lisa, I know we're having some technology problems, so I'm going to turn my camera off. I'm going to allow you to introduce yourself and probably ask you to turn your camera off too when you're presenting, just so hopefully the bandwidth will be a little bit better. But I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Amy. That was quite an introduction, and I am thrilled to be here and joining Forté Foundation and you as a friend to be talking about something that is so great and at our reach. And I appreciate that everyone has just taken the time to connect and join and provide some space for considering positivity and how we can use positivity to create connection and build resilience, especially in this time. So I suppose I'll turn off my camera now. I'm sorry about that. I think it's great to have the video, but we are having some connection problems. So I will turn off my camera, but I'll be here. What I would encourage is if you could please feel free to use the chat and share your questions. That would be really great for me to have that engagement and to hear from you and know what you're thinking, how you're feeling. So with that, I'm going to ask a question. How are we feeling today? And these days, and particularly right, if you could give me on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being outstanding, I am absolutely fabulous, rocking life, or 1, I'm holding on, scraping by. Let me know. Just write that in the chat. That would be great. I'm going to turn off my video and then we'll carry on. And if you could add as well afterwards, then a word, 1 word that would describe that number, a feeling. How are we feeling? So fairly high numbers, great. Uncertainty, uneasy, blessed, mundane, cranky, focused, disciplined, anxious, sad, encouraged, undecided, overwhelmed, peaceful, grateful, safe. Okay, so actually not a lot of repeat. Quite
Lisa, can I jump in? That I do see some struggling and some mundane in there, and some horribles even. So we can't ignore those.
No. Really very diverse. So the full spectrum, right? So we're seeing some higher numbers, a 9, great, 7, recharged, mixed, maybe we're there in the middle, some sad, anxious, overwhelmed, and great. And so it's really important that all over the place. So maybe a 5 is in the middle to just say all over the place. We might have a daily roller coaster, a weekly roller coaster, even, an hourly roller coaster in terms of emotions. So we're going to dig into emotions and try to better understand the utility of positive emotions, and then try to create some real practical ways that we can go about focusing our attention and creating positive emotions and bringing our attention to those positive emotions to reap the benefits for connection and building resilience. All right. I haven't turned off my camera yet. Amy, should I continue with the camera or? There we go. All right.
Actually, it just turned off. I think Janelle might have turned you off.
Great. All right, so let's carry on. Thank you all for sharing. And again, please use the chat for any questions, because we do want to hear from you. And I do want to respond to any thoughts, ideas, questions that you might have. So what I want this message and the next 40 minutes that we really have together to be focused on is that we all have the capacity to impact positively. And we're at a time where sometimes that feels really challenging. We have a sense that, many of us might be giving so much out, we don't feel that we have anything left for ourselves. And others might be saying, I don't even have for myself, how can I give to others, right? And so it is a sense often that we have this roller coaster. And so I want to inspire is that we all have the capacity, regardless of how we are, we're impacting others around us. And so how can we really use this learning and insight on positive emotions to leverage for our day-to-day for greater connection, building resources and resilience, and then how can we foster this culture of positivities? And because we are impacting, no matter what, our families, our teammates, our friends, our communities, and what is that impact? So think of it as the ripple effect. If you drop a pebble in the water, you have a ripple effect regardless. How can we leverage this knowledge, build some practice so that we can impact positively? And that's our focus of the session today. So this is what I call the Positive Leader Cornerstone framework. There are 4 elements. Ownership, that we need to take acceptance and responsibility for ourselves, our emotions, and really recognize and use that as a motivator for change. Positive emotions, which is where we're going to focus today as a place to bring our attention to really build those emotional resources. Followed by focus on others. When we take ownership and are come from a good place, that allows us to focus on others and develop greater abilities to listen, to empathize, to motivate, to take different perspectives, to innovate. And then finally, authentic communication. When we have this ownership, come from a good place with positive emotions, are able to focus on the others, then we can have those real authentic interactions, which again creates greater positive emotions. So these for me are very much intertwined, all part of the framework, but today we're going to focus specifically on positive emotions. So let's take a moment to consider the science behind positive emotions. And most of this is focused on the work of Barbara Fredrickson, who is an amazing person, individual, professor, researcher, who took it upon herself and with her teams to say, what is the utility of positive emotions? We know about negative emotions as a critical element for survival. And we know how negative emotions capture our attention and really allow us that focus and that drive. That comes from our survival. However, what is the utility of positive emotions? And Barbara Fredrickson looked into this to better understand positive emotions. So first of all, it's really important to say that all emotions are important. We're not going to try to live in a vacuum of only positive emotions. And that's sometimes where you get a lot of resistance around the discussion of positive emotions. People say, we don't want to be the Pollyanna. No, absolutely not. We want to be authentic and we want to be real and recognize that we all face challenges. Amy and Janelle and I from Forté were just talking about this before we got started, that everyone is facing different challenges. We're facing challenges in managing ourselves and our families, financial uncertainty, a range of emotions that we're managing in many different elements. And so we need to recognize that all of those emotions are important. We want to be authentic with them, but we also want to create the space and the ability for positive emotions to flourish, recognizing why those positive emotions are so critical to us now, especially, but in general. So negative emotions, we have this negativity bias. They capture our attention, and we need to be aware of that. And we need to recognize that positive emotions have very different action responses. So positive emotions build resources that allow for long-term survival. Negative emotions allow us to survive, but it's more individual, self-survival in the moment, in that critical moment for survival. That's why negative emotions capture our attention. And positive emotions have different action responses that allow for longer term community survival. So very different in terms of their utility. And we often know very much, very well and close how those negative emotions have an impact on us, we don't always recognize the impact and importance of positive emotions. So let's talk a little bit about what is an emotion. So an emotion is really fleeting. It's a signal, and it's triggered by some sort of meaning assessment. We recognize that, you know, some people, when presenting, let's say, have terrible fright of presenting, where others really relish in that opportunity. So that meaning assessment is really critical in terms of the emotions that each and everyone feels. So we have to recognize that that's going to be very different for each and every person. And we also have to recognize how interconnected we are in terms of our emotions, our mind, and our physical bodies. So we have a physical response to those emotions, and that can set off triggers in our head in terms of thinking. And those triggers can set off different types of spirals. And I'm going to talk about those spirals in just a moment. So keep in mind what is an emotion, but then we also have to understand the difference between the positive and the negative. So we have a greater appreciation, let's say, or closeness to negative emotions because they capture our attention. They hit us more. We could say that negative emotions are more like shouting. They really are there in your face. We feel them, and they can set off a whole system of responses in terms of, you know, heat, sweating, more emotions, you know, that urge to run, that urge to fight. But positive emotions, on the contrary, are like a whisper. They're very quiet, they're very subtle, and they often pass us by without even realizing it. So it's a flatter curve in that sense. I know we've been talking about curves a lot and flattening the curve, but we could think of positive emotions as more of a flatter curve. They're just not, they're more subtle. They're just not as, they don't impact us in the same way. And understanding the difference between those emotions can help us recognize why we can get caught on the negative emotions. So we want to better understand our emotions and consider just getting a little bit more granular. So a couple of slides here to help us, recognizing that, that we have different types of so we have the positive, negative, so positive on the right, negative on the left, but we also have arousal, which is the intensity that we feel those emotions. So we have the intensity and sort of this energy. We have more energy with high arousal emotions. We have high arousal not only in positive, but also in negative. Same with low arousal, negative and positive. So we want to gain a better sense, because when we can understand the emotion better, we can recognize where it's coming from and then create the response, create the space to understand the emotion and then respond rather than just react to that emotion. So I encourage you, when you're feeling emotion, definitely those high arousal negative emotions, try to just sit and provide the space a little bit with that emotion to understand it, because it can be very different when we are a little bit annoyed with something or if we're really fearful. And the same where with the positive emotion, we might want to, in the positive emotion, we might feel more comfortable with those high arousal positive emotions, but we also want to relish and savor those low arousal, the benefit of feeling relaxed. We might be missing that calm and that relax. And so we want to, when we feel that, to really pay attention to it as well. So let's talk about those spirals. Now, I'm very familiar with the downward spiral, and we talk about this and recognize how quickly it's that slippery slope that we can get onto into that downward spiral when you set off and you're running a little bit late, and then of course you have traffic, and then you miss the important part of the meeting and your idea is taken by someone else, and then you have a bad interaction with a colleague, and then at the end of the day you get home and you're frustrated and you just want the kids to go to bed so that you can have a moment of peace, and then you look at Facebook and say that everyone has a wonderful life except for me, right? That's a negative downward spiral, and they're so easy to get on. That's because we have this negativity bias, because we have this heightened attention to the negative, and the negative emotions we can sort of seep in, and we then go into our next action with that feeling. And so we're taking that lens of the negative emotion into our next interaction. So we're not bringing our best self into that next interaction, and that can create that self-sustaining negative spiral. So I was very well aware of this growing up, and I would talk about it. I'm sure we've all had these moments and we see how quickly we can get there. And then oftentimes we feel it's hard to get out of that downward spiral. So again, it's really important to consider the granularity of our emotions. When we can better define the emotions that we're feeling, it will allow us a greater ability to put the brakes on that spiral, to sort of pause. And when we have the learning and the appreciation of that downward spiral and how quickly it can happen, and we build on our ownership, that the choice of how we want to be, it'll allow us to put that brake on and to consider where that emotion is coming from and how we can better respond to that emotion. So understanding our emotions is critical, having the appreciation of the downward spiral, the utility of those negative emotions, but how we've created a habit of having those negative emotions and paying attention to those negative emotions. Now, what I hadn't considered before actually being able to learn with Barbara Fredrickson was that there is an upward spiral. It just hadn't even occurred to me that there would be an upward spiral. And Barbara's work supports the theory of this upward spiral, that positive emotions allow us to build resources, to put that positive lens on, so that we're continuously building on those positive emotions, and we can build that positive spiral. I think it's a great visual as well, because once we get moving up on that positive spiral, we realize that we can catch ourselves faster. We have greater resources to respond more appropriately to those ups and downs, that emotional roller coaster that we face during the day, and allow us to not fall so quickly into that negative spiral. So in order to build those resources and work up this positive spiral, we need to shift our attention. We need to take the learning around emotions and recognize the utility of negative emotions and when they might not be serving us well. The utility of positive emotions and saying, this is really fundamental for my being, my health, my well-being, my family, my community, my team, and work on increasing those positive emotions because that will have a greater ability for us to connect. When we are feeling positive, when we're feeling optimistic, we are able to come in a good place and be other focused. So at the beginning, think back at the beginning of the lockdown, because most of us have been in a lockdown at some point or another. At the very beginning, there was a check-in maybe, but there was a little bit of a hibernation, that people were dealing with themselves and their own emotions. And when we're in that sort of negative space, we're not thinking about how the other is. We're not able to reach out and check in with others beyond our real inner circle. When we are able to appreciate and come from a good place, we're able to be other focused and consider how is that other person doing? Check in with our neighbor, check in with our teammate, and really be able to connect with other people. So increasing our positive emotions allows us to be in a better space, which allows us then to be other focused and connect with other people. And that connection actually creates further positive emotions. And there we see how the upward spiral becomes self-sustaining. So Barbara Fredrickson's work shows that actually in negative emotions, our focus is narrow. That allows us to really address the issue, the harm, or the threat that we're perceiving. Yet positive emotions actually broadens our visual field. So broadening our visual field, we're able to take in more information. We're able to take in more about the other person, those subtle cues, and see more of the bigger picture. And in doing so, we might be able to also take in the other perspective. And by doing so, we can create or empathize more, take in greater perspective, and be more creative in our interactions. So we see how this self-sustaining upward spiral happens just by sparking those positive emotions. And by doing so, then we have this learning capacity around positive emotions, and that allows us to have make better decisions around our health, around our physical health, our mental health, We are able to rest more, for example, because we don't have those thoughts maybe that are those negative emotions that drive those negative thoughts, that anxiety in our head about what's happening, the uncertainty of what's to come, and find a greater sense of peace, which will allow us to rest better, which will allow us to feel more energy in the work that we're doing, which might allow us to then go and exercise, which again creates positive emotions through the reactions in our bodies. So we see how just shifting our attention to positive emotions, not that we're negating those negative emotions, but we're taking ownership and saying that we're not going to choose to focus on those. We're going to choose to focus our attention on the positive. And in doing so, we're creating positive emotions within ourselves, which allow us to connect, which allow us to create, which allow us to be more creative, which allows us to then further connect with people. And here we have this upward spiral. And this upward spiral is really what we call resilience. And resilience is the ability to, let's say, to flex and to recover when we are faced with upsets, when we're faced with bad news, when we're faced with little bumps in the road or big bumps in the road. And so we can see how important it is to build positive emotions, go linking them, leveraging the understanding and knowledge around positive emotions to create that connection, to build on creativity. And through doing so, we can build our resilience. So according to Barbara, we know, and we've heard this, that for every negative emotion, and I've heard lots of different, for every negative emotion, every negative experience, we need 3, 5, 9, 10 positive ones to outbalance that negative emotion, that negative experience. If we think, back to your report card growing up, oftentimes you have all A's and let's say 1 C, where does our attention go? To that C, right? And even though we have all other, excellent grades, we're caught by that one bad grade. And what happened? And what did I do? And how can I fix this? And so it's not that we want to completely avoid that. We can sit with that and say that doesn't feel good. I don't like that. But by recognizing and relativizing that emotion, we can say, what can I do about it to change that in the future? And one great way to do that is to appreciate the positive and to say, all right, that one didn't go so well. Look at all these other. What did I do here that went really well? And how can I leverage that learning, that experience, and that success of these other grades to help me to build and bring up that grade that I'm not happy with. So according to Barbara, the famous ratio is 3-to-1. We need 3 positive emotions for every negative emotion for flourishing. And flourishing means considering that we're living a life that we want to lead, that we have, positive well-being, feeling healthy, living with purpose, engaged, committed, feeling satisfaction in what we're doing and what we're spending our time on. So let me just say, if you were to consider the percentage of positive to negative emotions right now in your day-to-day, what would that percentage breakdown be? Do you feel that you have, let's go on 100%. Do you feel that we're at 50-50, 50 positive emotions, 50 negative? If you could write in the chat, what are your thoughts? And when we stop and recognize where our attention is going, what emotions are being triggered, that can help us to then respond in a different way. Okay, so great. If we're seeing some 70-30s, 80-20s, that's fabulous. Absolutely fabulous. I like that it depends on the day. That's a good one. Okay, great. No shame whatsoever. We are where we are, and this is a very challenging time, and everyone is faced with different challenges, right? I feel so fortunate that I have these tools, and I recognize that this is still hard. It is hard to put this into practice every single day. But what inspires me is that it's within my control. And when I recognize what's within my control, and that even if I have these emotions, it doesn't mean that I have to put my attention to them and let that negative spiral take over. That is empowering to me to say, hey, I can do something about it. Okay. And so just recognizing and trying to consider where our attention is going, and then consider how we can shift so that we can increase our positive emotions and not have that negative emotion take over, can really be beneficial. So before we go on to the how, because this is really, I wanted to take a little bit of time to just focus on the science and the understanding. Before we get into the how, I would love to stop and see if anyone has any questions. And Amy, I think if you have any that you'd like to share that you've seen.
Say that we got the question that we usually get right away, which is people are loving your deck and they want to know if you'll share. I know that we're going to be sharing a video. I think Lisa's agreed to do kind of an abbreviated version of the deck that we can pass out, but they're really, really enjoying that. But there's another question in here, whether or not you find it more difficult or easier to manage your emotions with all your knowledge on this topic.
That is a really good question. So I want to start by saying I'm human. I'm human like everyone else, and I have different challenges, my challenges, just as everyone has their own challenges. We're saying, what is it harder to have the small children or to have the teenager, the senior at home? Everything comes with their own challenges. What we do have under our control is our perspective on how we want to face those challenges. And I think that's where we need to focus. Is it easier for me? I'm just so grateful that I feel that I have the knowledge and the tools, yet I still have to practice them. I mean, we all have legs, right? Yet not all of us run at the same speed. Not all of us run as much as we should, right? We all have our legs and we all know how to use them, but that doesn't mean that it's that much easier to get out there and exercise. So, and exercise, for example, I'm based in Madrid, Spain. We weren't even able to leave our houses for 6 weeks. And so that was really a challenge. But recognizing that we do have the ability to decide how we're going to face those challenges, and then having this knowledge and this practice, how can we cultivate positive emotions? Because if we go back to the original point, is that we want to create this for ourselves, but we also want to create and share, have a positive impact on those around us. And when we do so, that helps to create a culture of positivity, because others are going to be reacting or responding to how we are communicating, to how we are being, to our emotions. Especially with children or teams, when we're in remote environments, the leader has such an important ability to impact, and they're impacting one way or the other. How they choose to impact and what they choose to focus on can really have a difference in how the team is managing during this time.
Hey, Lisa, I know you have a lot more to get through, but I think this question is really relevant to your last few slides. And it was more than negative. One attendee is thinking that sometimes emotions are unpleasant, but maybe not negative. And does framing them as negative contribute to a negative spiral?
Okay, that's a really good point. The language we use is critical. And so I encourage you, some people say it's a problem and other people see it as an opportunity, for example. So just calling them negative. And that's a really great point, in that it's not black and white. It isn't positive negatives. Some might be, that same emotion might be seen as a driver for someone, as unpleasant for another. So great point in terms of, we don't need to fit things into a positive and negative, but we need to sit with that emotion and be able to respond and listen to it as a signal and choose to respond to it. And if it's something that's unpleasant, maybe try to understand why, yet not also dwell on and let that emotion then influence, let's say, the rest of the day. Because the emotions we're feeling with, think of it as a lens, like glasses that we put on, and then we go to our next interaction with that emotion. So if we're having that frustrated emotion, we're going to take that into the next, and that we probably won't bring our best self, and that next interaction will be frustrating, and then we start connecting those frustrating dots, and we feel, and that builds bigger. That's how we get on that downward spiral. So if we have an unpleasant emotion, we say, this is frustrating. Just because it's frustrating doesn't mean everything has to be frustrating, and that allows us to shift our focus to something more positive and the opportunity that we have looking forward. So really great point. I am going to carry on. If you have any more questions, let me know. So oftentimes we see this, don't worry, be happy. And actually, I really struggle with this because I think this is even more frustrating, talking about the frustration. So I want to say, no, actually, that's not the best way. We don't want to just slap on the be happy, the positive emoji. We need all of those emotions. We need the full range of emotions. We can't just try to only focus on the positive emotions. It's important to recognize those negative emotions as signals, yet not let them pull us down that downward spiral. I think that's the important learning. And for positive emotions, what we want to do is cultivate authentically positive emotions. It's not just be happy. And oftentimes that's, be safe in these times, be happy. We just don't work that way. That sort of talk is not serving us well. But how can we create the space, and how can we create the positive emotion? So how can we build so that those positive emotions flourish? And one way is recognizing that in ourselves and recognizing this ripple effect that we have on others, in our families, in our teams. And as leaders, we really want to lead with that positive impact. So let's talk a little bit more about how, and I consider this as sort of two levers. How can we increase our positivity ratio so that we can work on building resources and have that greater upward spiral for well-being and flourishing? Well, one is to cultivate positive emotions, which we're going to talk about, and the other is to minimize negative emotions. Now, normally when we're faced with these options, we tend to focus on the fix. That our society says set up that way. We have this a little bit of a deficit mentality on this is what's wrong, let me fix it. And we're looking at what's wrong and how to fix it. But yet at the same time, we're not so motivated to do that. So while it is important to consider, let me minimize some of those negative stressors. If you're having someone that's really, I was speaking with a friend recently, and a very close family member was not being supportive of an entrepreneurial idea. Well, maybe minimize the conversation about that venture with that person. So that's one way of going about it. Yet oftentimes that doesn't help us to move upward in that spiral. It helps us to manage that particular moment. And what we want to really build greater connection and greater resilience. So it is okay to look at minimizing those negative emotions. That can do a quick sweep there to say, hey, how can I minimize some of these negative emotions? But where I want to focus our attention is not there on the fix it, but really how can we cultivate positive emotions? So above all, we need to take ownership. For me, that's why it's one of those cornerstones for positive leadership. But we can slow down and pay attention to our own emotions, not feel that those emotions are hijacking us. And we can intentionally and choose to focus on the positive experiences, recognizing that those create resources for our flourishing and upward spiral. So in considering those two levers, yes, it can be good to minimize some of those negative, but really what I want us to do is shift our focus to the positive and say, what can we learn from this? And so how can we manage those positive emotions? Number one, we can manage ourselves positively. So there, if we slow down and we pay attention, we can have a better appreciation of the inner dialogue that's happening in our head. What words are we using? Are we being compassionate with ourselves? Are we treating ourselves as we would treat others? So oftentimes we give so much, we're much more gracious and kind and supportive to others, yet we're really harsh on ourselves. So that's one way to just build our awareness around that dialogue, that conversation we have with ourselves, and try to change some of that language. A great way to go about managing ourselves positively as well is to set up some of those really basic routines. Sleep is critical because without sleep, we have trouble regulating our emotions. So looking for greater emotional stability and not that high and that low of the roller coaster, sleep is a great way to go about that. And when we're at home, it seems like we should have more time, but my sense is, and from my interactions, is that people feel they have less time. If we can set up some positive routines around, for example, sleep or eating times, the type of food that we're eating, are we fueling ourselves with healthy energy? That can be really helpful in terms of emotional regulation. So think of it as your body, sleep, nutrition, exercise, your mind. What is that dialogue? How can you manage yourself more positively? Those are going to help you in terms of then balancing those swings of emotions and shifting the focus to the positive. proactive connection is important. So connecting with people and having that authentic communication is really critical for creating positive emotions. A great way to go about this is through kindness. Kindness, when we are kind and reach out and help someone, it's like a gift of some way. So that connection creates positive emotions in ourselves, because the kindness is we feel good about giving to others, and it creates positive emotions in the other because they feel that someone has given them a gift, and the action response to that gratefulness of that kind act is to give back. And so that's a great power packed way to create positive emotions in ourselves and in others. So in this time of where connection is critical, giving first can be a great way, reaching out. So getting ourselves in order so that we're coming in a good place, and then being able to be other focused and reach out to connect can really create positive emotions. There's a lot of work around loneliness. Michael Steller does some great work around the connection culture and recognizing the importance of connecting to create positive emotions. So it's said that loneliness, when people feel lonely, has a physical equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So we understand the negative impact of smoking, but we might not have realized how physically damaging loneliness can be. And in this time of social distancing, which I don't like to say social distancing, let's say physical distancing, we need to be socially connecting. So I'll give you an example. I'm from California. I've started calling my parents every day, and it's something I don't think I've missed a day, and we both look forward to that moment of connection and having that real connection. So I encourage you to look to connect, because that creates further positive emotions. And we want to create the space for positivity as a culture. When we are coming from a good place and really being able to connect authentically with others, that creates that culture. We have that positive ripple, and people respond really well to that. So we were talking, we were connecting for this webinar, we were having technical issues, how we respond to that. If we get really upset about those technical issues, that's some negative emotions. Then we have to recover from those negative emotions. Yet if we can respond to that with ease and say, we really rely on technology, we don't have it, how can we manage this better? Well, I'll turn off my video and we can carry on. That allows us to unite. So instead of looking that negative emotions might separate or distance us further, we can consider how we respond with positive emotions, which creates a greater environment of positivity. So just to talk about a few specifics in terms of the action response to positive emotions, and it's important to say it's not just having that emotions, but actually recognizing that emotion. So really slowing down can be beneficial so that we can pay attention to those emotions. We might be more aware of high arousal emotions. Those low arousal emotions also have an action response, and we want to be able to pay attention to them. So when we have a sense of joy, we actually are encouraged, we have the action response to play. For those of you with small children, we were just talking about this, it can be really exhausting, small children, I know. Yet if we just slow down and listen to giggles, those giggles can really create positive emotions in us, and we're inspired to play. So how can we create greater joy in our work? If we really enjoy what we're doing, that'll encourage us to reach out and be curious and interact, discover. Plays can be linked to discovery as well. Inspiration, when we're feeling inspired, we aspire to greater excellence. So that can be some great motivation. So if you're working with your teams as a positive leader, how can you inspire others? Because that will allow them to feel greater motivation and aspire to excellence. Gratitude, I mentioned before, kindness is a great trigger, because when people feel that they've been received the gift of kindness, they have gratitude, and gratitude drives even more giving and creative giving. So in this time where we are physically distancing, we want to create a greater sense of community and connection. All of that creates positive emotions, and we can go about that in many different ways. And then pride. I think especially for women, pride is a very difficult emotion. Oftentimes we see it as more, so coming to that question earlier, sort of an uncomfortable emotion. Yet pride is seen as a positive emotion. And when we're feeling that sense of authentic pride, not arrogance, not being overly boastful, but just proud of the hard work that we've put in, that will drive a response of dreaming even bigger. So it's important to recognize the granularity around emotions and harness those positive emotions, because they have very specific action responses, which allow us to have even greater positive emotions, which drive that connection with other people, more positive emotions. And there we start building those critical resources, which allow us to build our resilience. So finally, just some very specifics about ways to go about building positive emotions. A great one is to get outdoors. So the bottom left, there's a lot of studies that show the importance of nature, especially for women. And getting outside and appreciating beauty, nature creates a sense of awe. It allows us to relativize and put in perspective what's happening. When we're in nature, even just seeing green trees, it increases recovery, physical recovery, mental recovery, and creates a greater sense of well-being. So it sort of is a reset. So I encourage you to get outdoors. If you can't get outdoors, just appreciate the nature that we have around us. Top right, we have smiling. Now this is one we want to be careful of. We don't want to just put on a fake smile, because that can actually do more damage. But if we slow down, we'll recognize that we will smile more. If we get outdoors and appreciate nature, that tends to lead us to that smile, and smiling really creates positive emotions. Then if you're smiling, interacting with someone, that also creates that those emotions between that connection. And so I encourage you to focus a little bit more on smiling and giving yourself that time to appreciate that moment. Self-compassion, so on the left-hand side, is really important, and especially for women, where we tend to be harder on ourselves. So this can increase our motivation and allow us to have more pro-social behaviors, such as connection. And when we come from a good place and we're connecting with other people, that increases our positive emotions and sustains that upward spiral. Another great way to increase positive emotions is practicing loving kindness meditation. This is on the top. Barbara Fredrickson has done a lot of work around loving kindness meditation as a way that increases our positive emotions, our well-being, and she's done a recent study that was published that allows us to see that it actually slows down aging. It can slow down aging. So I encourage you, we don't have time today, but I'd be happy to follow up with you after the webinar if anyone has any questions about how to put these practices into place. Loving kindness is a great way. It's a way also to build on self-compassion, because we can practice loving kindness for others, but we can also practice loving kindness for ourselves. Another great way to build positive emotions is to focus on skill development. Learning motivates us to practice and to share our learning, and it creates a sense of accomplishment, that pride, that positive pride to then dream big and to carry on and to be motivated to continue learning. And in terms of skill development, they're saying the only skill to really be learning right now is the skill of learning, because we're going to be constantly learning. So how can we shift our mindset in this difficult time to say, what can I learn from this? What can I learn about myself? How can I be curious? And be curious to connect, be curious to be kind in different ways, be curious about positive emotions. Let's be curious and learn how this upward spiral might work. Laughing, of course, is a great way that has physical benefits, connection, lots of positive emotions. And then one that we often don't take the time to appreciate is that calm, that serenity. And even in this sort of chaotic time, many of us are living in these small little bubbles, right? And the bubble that we have in our home can be a moment of serenity, of peace. And so we can take a moment to pause and really savor those small moments, those low arousal positive emotions that are very beneficial as well. So I see a lot of questions. Let me get to this next slide and just say there are so many benefits of positive emotions. So as a strategy for resilience, if we are able to shift our attention to positive emotions and cultivate positive emotions in ourselves, that will help increase our positive ripple and impact on others, and we can work on sustaining that positive upward spiral. So let me get to the questions now. Amy, would you do you have a good sense of the questions, or should I scroll
Yeah,
back to?
yeah, no, I'm happy to throw some at you because, as you said, they are piling up. Um,
Okay.
how do you deal with people around you when they don't seem to want to contribute to a positive environment?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And uh, the, this is a really challenging one for me because oftentimes it's just like be happy. You want to shout, be positive, right? Like you're hurting your health and you're hurting those around you by this negativity. However, it just doesn't work that way. So I think the best way to go about it is how can we create the conditions for positivity and recognize that everyone is unique and everyone is on their own journey. And so a great way is how we react to those people. Rather than reacting, if we are coming in a good place, from a good place, we're able to respond. For me, a great way to, after becoming a mother, my children are not as small as I'd like them to be, but still small. But becoming a mother was really important because all of a sudden I have two boys and I could say, everyone was a child and everyone has parents and everyone wants to make their parents proud. And sometimes people come from a negative space that they might say something, they might be harsh, they might react in a way that's not positive. And we have a choice. Oftentimes when we're busy and stressed, we react to that reaction and that creates more of an explosion. Whereas when we come from a good place and we can relativize, we could say, that person might be having a tough day. And rather than sort of adding fuel to that fire, how can we respond in a different way? And recognize, and when someone sees that that it doesn't create an explosion, they might consider, oh, what's that person? How is that working for them? And everyone is on their own journey. So we need to see this, that we can't, just like we can't say be happy, we can't say be positive, we can't sort of push our agenda on others, but we can create the environment, recognize that we are impacting others and take ownership for that ripple effect and the positive impact that we want to create in others.
Yeah, Lisa, this question actually
Any other questions?
this question directly follows what you just said about, we recognize that we can't be happy all the time. And one attendee said that a lot of times she's heard people say it's okay not to be okay all the time. But how do you find the balance, especially when you're in the negative side? Do you have to be okay with it, or do you try to force yourself to move into a positive space?
That's a really great question, and that I think that's why this is so difficult. So the ideal would be to be up on that upward spiral. This is where mindfulness can come in and be very beneficial. When we slow down, we're able to tap into and really get to what those emotions are. Typically people, when, the negative emotion that's most said is anger. And often, even before the pandemic, I think it was 70 to 80% of people who went to the doctor went with stress related symptoms. So about stress. So oftentimes we can be in a really bad place, and this pandemic has really cut off a lot of our connection and our routines, and we've sort of been upended in certain ways. So the first step, I think, is recognizing that and having that just be okay, being kind to ourselves and saying, this is tough. And when we acceptance is really critical into as a step into the next place. When we don't want to accept those emotions, or we really get harsh on ourselves or critical, we're not helping ourselves move forward. So think about, if we're just, really challenged, if we're hard on ourselves and saying you shouldn't be this way, we're not motivated to change. If we accept those emotions and say every emotion is valid, now what? Okay, that emotion is valid. All right, but how am I going to respond to that? And that's why the 4 cornerstone elements of positive leader is really important, because we need to take ownership and say we can decide this is really hard, but how do I choose to respond? And then have the tools to get us going. So sometimes, what would 1% better look like? And when we're in a really dark place, 1% might be, I just need a good night's sleep. So let me just take some deep breaths and get myself out of this motion. And, tomorrow is a new day, and focus on a good nighttime routine that's going to set me up to get positive sleep. So I'm sure we've all been there. I was there as well, checking the stats early on. What are the daily stats before going to bed? And I found I wasn't sleeping well. I found that many people are not sleeping well. And so you can say, is this action serving me well? And so I stopped looking at the stats at the end of the day and said, I need to prioritize my health. I need to prioritize positive emotions. And those, looking at the stats at the end of the day is not helping me. Right? Same as checking your email late at night and then sort of having your mind going around what's pending, or, being at the mercy of the tone or the mood that the email sender was in. So did I answer that question, Amy?
Yeah, no, I think that's great. Here's a one that might sound silly, but people can't always see you smile when you're wearing a face mask, which is the new norm as we all head outdoors right now. Any suggestions for?
Okay. Yes, I think about that a lot. I think it's going to impact us. I think we're going to find new ways to show how we're feeling. I believe that we're going to get to some point where we have see-through masks. I'm hoping. However, an authentic smile, we see it in our eyes. And so we might have to, when we come from a good place and we're in those positive emotions, we get better at capture. Remember I said positive emotions broaden our visual field. We're able to capture more of what's happening. We're able to take in what that person is feeling. There's a great exercise where you just see people's eyes and you try to identify the emotion with in people's eyes. And we can become more attuned to eyes as opposed to mouth, because an authentic smile is accompanied by the eyes. Okay. We might have other ways where we have a hand signal that's kind of a positive hand signal. I think we'll find new ways to communicate as we move to a new stage, a new transition of coming out. So.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know if this counts, Lisa, but I will say that I'm much more cognizant of saying thank you every time I'm at the grocery store, which has only been about 3 times since this all happened. But just saying thank you has become my new norm. We have a question about the weight that's put on each of us as individuals to manage our emotions when you're not being supported by others. And then when you talk about wanting the support from others, sometimes they see you as being super sensitive. Any way to balance kind of managing your own emotions, but also being vocal about your need for support?
That's a really great question. I think it's hard, but I think we need to strengthen our inner pillar. And that's a lot of work that I've done on myself. And, sometimes we look for external validation, and that weakens us in that we are looking to others for a response or for that validation or for that support. And while I believe that is important, it can't be the only. And so I would encourage with this learning to really focus on slowing down, taking care of some of our vitality around, sleep, eating, fueling our bodies with positive energy. I think we all know what that means. Getting some movement, 20 minutes a day, some movement. That's a great start that we have ownership over. And slowing down in terms of not letting ourselves get on that sort of hamster wheel of a feeling of busyness. Really just taking a few deep breaths and recognizing how interconnected we are, and relying on our physical to help us to try to regulate some of those positive emotions, which then will allow us to maybe regulate some of those thoughts that we have, which will allow us to focus more on cultivating those positive emotions. And we have a lot of control ourselves. Of course, everyone is on their own journey, and some people really need more help at this moment than others. So if you do need that help, definitely feel that you reach out, but recognize that we have a lot of tools and resources ourselves, and we don't want to diminish our capacity to take ownership and cultivate those positive emotions. So I encourage everyone to just slow down and pay attention to that self-care, developing greater empathy, self-compassion with ourselves, and taking care of ourselves, some of those core elements, the physical, which are helping ourselves create the conditions for flourishing, for positive emotions. then couple that with how can I reach out to those people and make those authentic communication? And when we do reach out, how are we reaching out? You know, are we reaching out and saying, what kind of language we're using? The language we use is really critical to the signals we're sending to our bodies. So are we saying this is a disaster, this is awful, this is horrible, how could this happen? We just feel the anxiety rising from within just with a couple of words. Or we could say, you know, calmly, this is hard, I'm really struggling, this is what I've done. Give ourselves credit for, these are the steps I've taken and I'm still struggling. Any ideas? You know, asking for ideas is a great way to connect with other people, because in general, if we're connecting with those people, they're going to be genuinely wanting to help us.
Hey, Lisa, we have time for one more question, and I want to ask this one because, and I'm not sure you have an answer, but it's something that I think we can all relate to, which, do you have any idea how uncertainty influences emotions? Have you kept up on any of the positive psych literature over this time period?
So I don't have a specific study to cite, but as humans, the uncertainty that we face, and we're facing a lot of uncertainty, especially financial uncertainty, you know, the uncertainty of the future, sort of pulls us away from the present. And a lot of positive psychology is based on the recognizing and keeping our focus in the present. So this is mindfulness training. When we are in the present, we don't allow ourselves to get caught on what would be a worry loop about the future. We tend to live forward or live back, and those worry loops can sort of self-sustain. So, you know, what happened? Did I do that right? Self-doubt. Could have I done that better? That looking back and how I could improve it, which can be very beneficial, but we don't want to get stuck there. And that uncertainty of the future can really create different reactions in people. So some people can feel, wow, this is an exciting time of change. You know, this is fantastic. Something's positive is going to come out of this. And other people going to just want to bury themselves in a hole and say, make this go away. Recognizing your response to that uncertainty, slowing down and sitting with it, can help you to gain a greater sense of acceptance, to then focus on the present. And that can help you to move forward with greater strength and resilience. And so I think that's the best way. There's so many distractions. The future, that uncertainty you could consider as a distraction. How can we bring ourselves back to the present and back to our area of control, and not let that become overwhelming and take over?
Great. Lisa, this has been so insightful. As I shared with the audience at the beginning, you know, I've been flirting with positive psychology for years now, and I feel like I learned so much more even just today in this time period. Just on behalf of Forté, thank you so much for sharing your expertise, your insight, your time, and we really appreciate it. And I know that we'll be sending out the video as well as an abbreviated deck. So thanks for being here, Lisa.
Thank you so much, Amy. This has been a pleasure to be able to have the space to talk about something that I think is so important, and to consider a little bit more depth on the science behind positive emotions. And then hopefully everyone has taken some pearl of wisdom in terms of how to start creating and cultivating positive emotions, recognizing how important they are. So thank you for the opportunity. I've loved this time and space. I wish we had more time. I will jump ahead and just leave you with my LinkedIn. If anyone would like to connect, please feel free to connect.
I was just going to ask you for that, Lisa, because we got several questions about your contact information. So thank you for putting that slide up.
Okay, well, thank you, Amy. And I'll stay on another moment if anyone has any last questions. I know many people have to go, but thank you so much. This has been really great to be able to talk about positive emotions. I think you can hear me smiling, can't you? Even though you can't see me, you know I'm smiling.
Definitely can hear you. Definitely can hear you smiling, and appreciate it. And I think we're gonna end now. But again, Lisa put up her contact information so you know how to get in touch with her. And I'm gonna just echo what the chat function is saying right now, which that this was such a fantastic webinar. So thanks.
Thank you, Amy. Bye-bye.
Bye.